In the summer of 1914, all of Europe marched off to war dreaming of a quick, glorious victory. But those dreams, well, they shattered almost immediately. So let's dig into how a war that was supposed to be all about rapid movement ground to a horrifying halt and gave birth to the brutal stalemate of the trenches. Here's the big question, right? In 1914, there was this universal belief, this short war illusion, that the boys would be home by Christmas. That hope was just completely and utterly wrong. So how on earth did a war of sweeping advances turn into a 4-year nightmare stuck in the mud? Okay, so first up, let's look at the competing master plans. You see, each of the big players on the Western Front had a strategy they were convinced would deliver a swift, knockout blow in just a few weeks. So on one side, you've got France's Plan 17. The goal? A head-on, super-fast offensive to take back the lost lands of Alsace-Lorraine. Their whole strategy was based on this idea of élan vital, basically the unstoppable fighting spirit of the French soldier. Then you have Germany's Schlieffen Plan. This was a really intricate plan designed to avoid a nightmare two-front war. The idea was to just sweep through neutral Belgium, loop around Paris, and crush France in 6 weeks flat, all before the massive Russian army could get its act together. And the craziest part? Both of these grand plans were built on the exact same, fatally flawed idea, that one big, bold offensive battle would end the war just like that. But, no plan survives contact with the enemy, and when these two grand strategies smashed right into each other in August 1914, well, the result was an absolute catastrophe. This brings us to the Battle of the Frontiers. The first few clashes were a brutal, brutal shock. I mean, you had the French army marching forward with 19th century tactics, bayonet charges, wearing these bright red and blue uniforms you could see a mile away. They were running straight into the buzzsaw of 20th century warfare, entrenched Germans with machine guns and modern artillery. The result was just pure carnage. France's Plan 17, with its whole doctrine of offense at all costs, pretty much failed the second it started. Those glorious charges into Lorraine were cut to pieces. The entire strategy just completely unraveled against the sheer defensive power of modern weapons. And the human cost, it's just staggering. On one single day, August 22nd, 1914, the French army lost 27,000 men killed. To put that in perspective for you, it is still the single deadliest day in the entire history of the French military. Any illusion of a short, glorious war died right there. Now, while all of this was happening and the Germans were advancing in the West, a huge and unexpected crisis just exploded on the Eastern Front, and it forced the German High Command to make a decision that would change everything. You see, Russia got its massive army moving way faster than the Schlieffen Plan have ever predicted, and they invaded German territory. This caused an absolute panic in Berlin, so the Germans pulled 2 entire army corps from their main attack in France and rushed them east. And yeah, they won a stunning victory at the Battle of Tannenberg, basically wiping a whole Russian army off the map. But, and this is a huge but, that victory came at a terrible price. It fatally weakened the German armies in France right at the most crucial moment of their advance. Which brings us to early September. The German armies, now stretched thin and absolutely exhausted, are on the Marne River, just outside Paris. They can practically see the Eiffel Tower. But this is where the tide was about to turn, dramatically. So how did the so-called miracle on the Marne happen? Well, first, the German armies were so overstretched that a huge vulnerable gap opened up right in their front line. Then, Allied reconnaissance planes spotted this critical weakness. The French and the British Expeditionary Force jumped on the opportunity, pivoting and slamming into the exposed German flank with a massive counterattack. The German advance was stopped dead in its tracks, and they were forced into a full-scale retreat. And just like that, the Schlieffen Plan was toast. So, with the grand plans of both France and Germany completely in shambles, the war of movement was finished. The dream of a quick victory was gone. And now, both sides had to figure out what to do in a war that nobody had planned for. What happened next is famously called the Race to the Sea, but that name is actually a little misleading. It wasn't a race to the ocean. It was really a desperate, month-long scramble by each army to try and get around the northern end of the other's line. So after being pushed back from the Marne, the Germans dug in on some high ground to protect themselves from all the artillery and machine gun fire. The Allies couldn't push them out, so they dug in too. And what started as just some simple, temporary protective ditches would soon become the defining, horrifying feature of the entire war. And this kicked off this crazy, deadly cycle for the next few weeks. One side would try to swing around the other's flank to the north. That move would get blocked, and both armies would dig in. Then they'd try again, a little further north, blocked again. So they'd dig more trenches. This just kept repeating over and over, with this long, ugly scar of a trench line stretching farther and farther north toward the sea. This whole deadly race finally came to a head in one last massive and unbelievably bloody battle in the fields of Flanders in Belgium. This is really the moment the final piece of the puzzle clicks into place. At the First Battle of Ypres, both sides threw literally everything they had left into one last desperate attempt to break through. The fighting was just ferocious. In the end, nobody could gain an advantage. After staggering casualties, the race was finally over. The trench line now stretched all the way to the coast. And this was the result. Think about it. An unbroken, continuous line of trenches, barbed wire, and machine gun nests sneaking for 475 miles, all the way from the North Sea coast down to the border of neutral Switzerland. The Western Front, this static, unmoving meat grinder of a battlefield that absolutely no one had planned for or wanted, was now a reality. It was really a perfect storm. You had the failure of everyone's grand plans combined with the incredible defensive power of modern weapons. It all came together to create this brutal, bloody stalemate. The war of movement was officially dead. So by the winter of 1914, the stalemate was set. The troops were not home for Christmas. But the question that just hangs over all of this is, with the plans in tatters and this vast scar carved across the continent, could anyone back then have possibly imagined that this deadlock would last for 4 more horrific years and consume millions more lives? It's a really chilling thought to me.